Hello, uh, good morning, good evening, good night. So, yes, I'm here. Okay, so what do we have to do right now? We are to talk. We are to talk about something, something that it's that matters. So, what are you calling? Okay, what I'm calling today, I have to just check it out. My week six, my week seven of this course, CS50's Introduction to Programming with Python. So, if you, as you can see in the list, I already done the first uh, chapters, and so I have to complete, have to do regular expressions, the seventh chapter. So that's it. I have to. I'm not coding specifically something. Just I'm just doing the homeworks that Harvard give me, and yeah, that's it. So good boy, no dreamer boy. Some bots habla inglés, ¿no? Okay, okay, okay. So today I'm just gonna do Harvard homeworks test. Yeah. No, actually, just course online. So, ta 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 ta. Ta. Yeah. Oh, actually, are you Harvard? Are you in Harvard, bro? No, no. I'm just follow this online course. Okay. Dream boy, are you? You are inviting. You are invited to follow me in my Discord. If you want it, we can talk about by Discord. My Discord is this Discord. Let me show you my Discord. My Discord is this. Let me show you the Discord. Discord, Discord is a good idea in order if you wanted to talk or if you wanted to share your experience. Following, following. Yes. Okay, bro. Yeah. Dream boy, are you programmer or are you code person? I don't know how to say. Are you interested in coding, something like that, like a coding right now? Uh, Discord, Discord. Yeah, so this is Discord, and Discord is a great platform in order to uh, communicate, talk, and share and grow the community. So many people have you text me in Discord. Have text me, profe. Mm, I'm 17 and I am a student. I do vibe coding. Vibe coding is like ask for AI to code for you, right? It's like a kind of that, right? Isn't it? So I don't know what I'm doing right now. Just this is the hardware shop, but I'm not interested in watch this. I'm gonna to show you my Discord. My Discord is this. Okay, let me show you my Discord. This is the Discord channel. the Discord channel is this. Let me ah yeah, Discord. Okay. Uh, yes, bro. We asked AI to code. Yeah, that's kind of boring. I think I respect you, but bro, but I think it's kind of boring to ask you the AI to code. I don't know. I prefer to maybe ask if I have a problem, an issue, but I think the good thing is understand what you have to do and understand what you have to do and then complete complete the task. So, but I am just 17. I don't know coding. Yeah, bro. Welcome to the club. I'm not. I don't know how can I code to either, but I wanna know. I wanna to learn. So it's okay. It's okay. You don't know how to code. I don't know how to code, but I want to know. I want to learn. So I wanted to show you something, but I can. I don't know why I can send you show you this. Uh, yeah, let me. Mm, it doesn't work. I'm sorry. It doesn't work. I don't know why. Let me try with captura screenshot. No, 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 no. Well, this this is this is the oh I can I'm not able to show my my code my Discord. I don't know why. Well, my Discord is C50 Python with Absalone. Please follow me. CS50 Python with Absalone. CS50 Python with Absalone. Yeah, CS50 Python with Absalone. I think you can find us as let me share kind of code uh, oh yeah, I think if there is a description, in this video. So if you watch the description uh, in this video, you can find the code, the the code, the link in for coding for Discord. Yeah, yeah, because I can find it right actually. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. To do. Yeah. Okay. 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 So to do, we are gonna to learn regular expressions. So we are gonna to learn regular expressions. We are gonna to go to click in this video.
All right, this is CS50's Introduction to Programming with Python. My name is David Malin, and this is our week on regular expressions. So a regular expression, otherwise known as a regex, is really just a pattern. And indeed, it's quite common in programming to want to use patterns to match on some kind of data, often user input. For instance, if the user types in an email address, whether to your program or a website or an app on your phone, you might ideally want to be able to validate that they did indeed type in an email address and not something completely different. So using regular expressions, we're going to have the newfound capability to define patterns in our code to compare them against data that we're receiving from someone else, whether it's just to validate it or, heck, even if we want to clean up a whole lot of data that itself might be messy because it too came from us humans. Before, though, we use these regular expressions, let me propose that we solve a few problems using just some simpler syntax and see what kind of limitations we run up against. Let me propose that I open up VS Code here, and let me create a file called validate.py. The goal at hand being to validate, how about just that, a user's email address. They've come to your app, they've come to your website, they type in their email address, and we want to say yes or no, this email address looks valid. All right, let me go ahead and type code of validate.py to create a new tab here. And then within this tab, let me go ahead and start writing some code. How about that keeps things simple initially? First, let me go ahead and prompt the user for their email address, and I'll store the return value of input in a variable called email, asking them, what's your email, question mark. I'm going to go ahead and preemptively at least clean up the user's input a little bit by minimally just calling strip at the end of my call to input, because recall that input returns a string or a stir. Strs come with some built-in methods or functions, one of which is strip, which has the effect of stripping off any leading white space to the left or any trailing white space to the right. So that's just going to go ahead and at least avoid the human having accidentally typed in a space character. We're going to throw it away just in case. Now I'm going to do something simple. For a user's input to be an email address, I think we can all agree that it's got to minimally have an @ sign somewhere in it. So let's start simple. If the user has typed in something with an @ sign, let's very generously just say, OK, valid. Looks like an email address. And if we're missing that @ sign, let's say invalid, because clearly it's not an email address. It's not going to be the best version of my code yet, but we'll start simple. So I'm going to ask the question, if there is an @ symbol in the user's email address, go ahead and print out, for instance, quote unquote valid. Else, if there's not, now I'm pretty confident that the email address is in fact invalid. Now, what is this code doing? Well, if @ sign in email is a Pythonic way of asking, is this string, quote unquote in this other string, email, no matter where it is, at the beginning, the middle, or the end, it's going to automatically search through the entire string for you automatically. I could do this more verbosely, and I could use a for loop or a while loop and look at every character in the user's email address, looking to see if it's an @ sign. But this is one of the things that's nice about Python. You can do more with less. So just by saying if @ quote unquote in email, we're achieving that same result. We're going to get back true if it's somewhere in there, thus valid, or false if it is not. Well, let me go ahead now and run this program in my terminal window with Python of validate.py. And I'm going to go ahead and give it my email address, malin@harvard.edu, enter. And indeed, it's valid. Looks valid is valid. But of course, this program's technically broken. It's buggy. What would be an example input, if someone might like to volunteer an answer here, that would be considered valid, but you and I know it really isn't valid?
Yeah, thank you. Well, for instance, you can type just two signs and that's it, and it still be valid according to your program, but the same.
Exactly. We've set a very low bar here. In fact, if I go ahead and rerun python of validate.py, and I'll just type in one @, that's it. No username, no domain name. This doesn't really look like an email address, but unfortunately my code thinks it in fact is, because it's obviously just looking for an @ alone. Well, how could we improve this? Well, minimally, an email address I think tends to have, though this is not actually a requirement, tends to have an @ and a single dot at least, maybe somewhere in the domain name. So malin@harvard.edu. So let's check for that dot as well, though again, strictly speaking, doesn't even have to be that case. But I'm going for my own email address, at least for now, as our test case. So let me go ahead and change my code now and say not only if @ is an email, but also dot is in email as well. So I'm asking now two questions. I have two Boolean expressions, if @ in email, and I'm anding them together logically. This is a logical and, so to speak. So if it's the case that @ is in email and dot is in email, OK, now I'm going to go ahead and say valid. All right, this would still seem to work for my email address. Let me go ahead and run python of validate.py, malin@harvard.edu, enter. And that, of course, is valid as expected. But here, too, we can be a little adversarial and type in something nonsensical like @dot. And unfortunately, that, too, is going to be mistaken as valid, even though there's still no username, domain name, or anything like that. So I think we need to be a little more methodical here. In fact, notice that if I do this like this, the @ can be anywhere, and the dot can be anywhere. But if I'm assuming the user is going to have a traditional domain name like harvard.edu or gmail.com, I really want to look for the dot in the domain name only, not necessarily just the username. So let me go ahead and do this. Let me go ahead and introduce a bit more logic here, and instead do this. Let me go ahead and do email.split of quote unquote @. So email again is a string or a str. Strs come with methods not just strip, but also another one called split that, as the name implies, will split one str into multiple ones if you give it a character or more to split on. So this is hopefully going to return to me two parts from a traditional email address, the username and the domain name. And it turns out I can unpack that sequence of responses by doing this. Username, comma, domain equals this. I could store it in a list or some other structure, but if I already know in advance what kinds of values I'm expecting, a username and hopefully a domain, I'm going to go ahead and do it like this instead and just define two variables at once on one line of code. And now I'm going to be a little more precise. If username, then I'm going to go ahead and say print valid. Else, I'm going to go ahead and say print invalid. Now, this isn't good enough, but I'm at least checking for the presence of a username now. And you might not have seen this before, but if you simply ask a question like if username, and username is a string, well, if username is going to give me a true answer if username is anything except none or quote unquote nothing. So there's a truthy value here, whereby if username has at least one character, that's going to be considered true. But if username has no characters, it's going to be considered a false value effectively. But this isn't good enough. I don't want to just check for username. I want to also check that it's the case that dot is in the domain name as well. So notice here there's a bit of potential confusion with the English language. Here I seem to be saying if username and dot in domain, as though I'm asking the question if the username and the dot are in the domain, but that's not what this means. These are two separate Boolean expressions. If username, and separately, if dot in domain. And if I parenthesize this, we could make that even more clear by putting parentheses there, parentheses here. So just to be clear, it's really two Boolean expressions that we're ANDing together, not one longer English-like sentence. Now, if I go ahead and run this, Python of validate.py, enter, I'll do my own email address again, mailin@harvard.edu, and that's valid. And it looks like I could tolerate something like this. If I do mailin at, just say Harvard, I think at the moment this is going to be invalid. Now maybe the top level domain Harvard exists, but at the moment it looks like we're looking for something more. We're looking for a top level domain too, like .edu. So for now, we'll just consider this to be invalid. But it's not just that we want to do invalid. It's not just that we want to check for the presence of a username and the presence of a dot. Let's be more specific. Let's start to now narrow the scope of this program, not just to be about generic emails more generally, but about edu addresses. So specifically for someone in a US university, for instance, whose email address tends to end with .edu. I can be a little more precise, and you might recall this function already. Instead of just saying, is there a dot somewhere in domain, let me instead say, and the domain ends with, quote unquote, .edu. So now we're being even more precise. We want there to be minimally a username that's not empty. It's not just quote unquote nothing. And we want the domain name to actually end with .edu. Let me go ahead and run python of validate.py. And just to make sure I haven't made things even worse, let me at least test my own email address, which does seem to be valid. Now, it seems that I minimally need to provide a username, because we definitely do have that check in place. So I'm going to go ahead and say Mailin. And now I'm going to go ahead and say @ and it looks like I could be a little malicious here, just say mailin at .edu, as though minimally meeting the requirements of this pattern. And that, of course, is considered valid, but I'm pretty sure there's no one at mailin at .edu. We need to have some domain name in there, so we're still not being quite as generous. Now, we could absolutely continue to iterate on this program, and we could add some more Boolean expressions. We could maybe use some other Python methods for checking more precisely. Is there something to the left of the dot, to the right of the dot? We could use split multiple times, but honestly, this just escalates quickly. Like, you end up having to write a lot of code just to express something that's relatively simple in spirit. Just format this like an email address. So how can we go about improving this? Well, it turns out in Python, there's a library for regular expressions. It's called succinctly RE. And in the RE library, you have a lot of capabilities to define and check for and even replace patterns. Again, a regular expression is a pattern, and this library, the RE library in Python, is going to let us define some of these patterns, like a pattern for an email address, and then use some built-in functions to actually validate a user's input against that pattern, or even use these patterns to change the user's input or extract partial information therefrom. We'll see examples of all this and more. So what can and should I do with this library? Well, first and foremost, it comes with a lot of functionality. Here's the URL, for instance, to the official documentation. And let me propose that we focus on using one of the most versatile functions in the library, namely this, search. re.search is the name of the function in the RE module that allows you to pass in a few arguments. The first is going to be a pattern that you want to search for in, for instance, a string that came from a user. The string argument here is going to be the actual string that you want to search for that pattern. And then there's a third argument, optionally, that's a whole bunch of flags. A flag, in general, is like a parameter you can pass in to modify the behavior of the function. But initially, we're not even going to use this. We're just going to pass in a couple of arguments instead. So let me go ahead and employ this RE library, this regular expression library, and just improve on this design incrementally. So we're not going to solve this problem all at once, but we'll take some incremental steps. I'm going to go back to VS Code here, and I'm going to go ahead now and get rid of most of this code, but I'm going to go into the top of my file and first of all import this RE library. So import RE gives me access to that function and more. Now, after I've gotten the user's input in the same way as before, stripping off any leading or trailing white space, I'm just going to use this function super trivially for now, even though this isn't really a big step forward. I'm going to say if re.search contains quote unquote at in the email address, then let's go ahead and print valid. Else, let's go ahead and print invalid. At the moment, this is really no better than my very first version where I was just asking Python if @ in the email address. But now, I'm at least beginning to use this library by using its own re.search function, which for now you can assume returns a true value effectively if indeed the @ is in email. Just to make sure that this version does work as I expect, let me go ahead and run python of validate.py and enter. I'll type in my actual email address, and we're back in business. But of course, this is not great, because if I similarly run this version of the program and just type in an @ not an email address, and yet my code, of course, thinks it is valid. So how can I do better than this? Well, we need a bit more vocabulary in the realm of regular expressions in order to be able to express ourselves a little more precisely. Really, the pattern I want to ultimately define is going to be something like, I want there to be something to the left, then an @ then something to the right, and that something to the right should end with .edu, but should also have something before the .edu, like Harvard or Yale or any other school in the US as well. Well, how can I go about doing this? Well, it turns out that in the world of regular expressions, whether in Python or a lot of other languages as well, there are certain symbols that you can use to define patterns. At the moment, I've just used literal raw text. If I go back to my code here, this technically qualifies as a regular expression. I've passed in a quoted string inside of which is an @. Now, that's not a very interesting pattern. It's just an @, but it turns out that once you have access to regular expressions or a library that offers that feature, you can more powerfully express yourself as follows. Let me reveal that the pattern that you passed, re.search, can take a whole bunch of special symbols, and here's just some of them. In the examples we're about to see, in the patterns we're about to define, here are the special symbols. You can use a single period, a dot, to just represent any character except a new line, a blank line. So that is to say, if I don't really care what letters of the alphabet are in the user's username, I just want there to be one or more characters in the user's name, dot allows me to express A through Z, uppercase and lowercase, and a bunch of other letters as well. Star is going to mean, in single asterisk, 0 or more repetitions. So if I say something star, that means that I'm willing to accept either 0 repetitions, that is nothing at all, or more repetitions, 1 or 2 or 3 or 300. If you see a plus in my patterns, that's going to mean 1 or more repetitions. That is to say, there's got to be at least one character there, one symbol, and then there's optionally more after that. And then you can say 0 or 1 repetition. You can use a single question mark after a symbol, and that will say I want 0 of this character or 1, but that's all I'll expect. And then lastly, there's going to be a way to specify a specific number of symbols. If you use these curly braces and a number, represented here symbolically as m, you can specify that you want m repetitions, be it 1 or 2 or 3 or 300. You can specify the number of repetitions yourself. And if you want a range of repetitions, like you want this few characters or this many characters, you can use curly braces and two numbers inside, called here m and n, which would be a range of m through n repetitions. Now, what does all of this mean? Well, let me go back to VS Code here, and let me propose that we iterate on this solution further. It's not sufficient to just check for the @ sign. We know that already. We minimally want something to the left and to the right. So how can I represent that? I don't really care what the user's username is or what letters of the alphabet are in it, be it Malin or anyone else's. So what I'm going to do to the left of this equal sign is I'm going to use a single period. The dot that again indicates any character except for a new line. But I don't just want a single character. Otherwise, the person's username could only be A at such and such or B at such and such. I want it to be multiple such characters, so I'm going to initially use a star. So dot star means give me something to the left, and I'm going to do another one, dot star something to the right. Now, this isn't perfect, but it's at least a step forward, because now what I'm going to go ahead and do is this. I'm going to rerun python to validate.py. I'm going to keep testing my own email address just to make sure I haven't made things worse, and that's now OK. I'm now going to go ahead and type in some other input, like how about just Malin at with no domain name whatsoever. And you would think this is going to be invalid, but it's still considered valid. But why is that? If I go back to this chart, why is Malin at with no domain now considered valid? What's my mistake here? By having used dot star at name whatsoever, and you would think this is going to be invalid, but it's still considered valid. But why is that? If I go back to this chart, why is Malin at with no domain now considered valid? What's my mistake here? By having used dot star at dot star as my regular expression or regex.
Because you're using the star instead of the plus sign?
Exactly. The star, again, means 0 or more repetitions. So re.search is perfectly happy to accept nothing after the @ sign, because that would be 0 repetitions. So I think I minimally need to evolve this and go back to my code here. And let me go ahead and change this from dot star to dot plus. And let me change the ending from dot star to dot plus, so that now when I run my code here, let me go ahead and run python of validate.py. I'm going to test my email address as always. Still working. Now let me go ahead and type in that same thing from before that was accidentally considered valid. Now I hit enter. Finally, it's invalid. So now we're making some progress on being a little more precise as to what it is we're doing. Now, I'll note here, like with almost everything in programming, Python included, there's often multiple ways to solve the same problem. Python included, there's often multiple ways to solve the same problem. And does anyone see a way in my code here that I could make a slight tweak if I forgot that the plus operator exists and go back to using a star? If I allowed you only to use dots and only stars, could you recreate the notion of plus?
Yes, use another dot. Dot star.
Yeah, because if a dot means any character, we'll just use a dot. And then when you want to say or more, use another dot and then the star. So equivalent to dot plus would have been dot star, because the first dot means any character, and the second pair of characters, dot star, means 0 or more other characters. And to be clear, it does not have to be the same character. Just by doing dot or dot star does not mean your whole username needs to be A or AA or AAA or AAAA. It can vary with each symbol. It just means 0 or more of any character back to back. So I could do this on both the left and the right. Which one is better? You know, it depends. I think an argument could be made that this is even more clear because it's obvious now that there's a dot, which means any character, and then there's the dot star. But if you're in the habit of doing this frequently, one of the reasons things like the plus exist is just to consolidate your code into something a little more succinct. And if you're familiar with seeing the plus, now maybe this is more readable to you. So again, just like with Python more generally, you're going to often see different ways to express the same patterns, and reasonable people might agree or disagree as to which way is better than another. Well, let me propose to you that we can think about both of these models a little more graphically. If this looks a little cryptic to you, let me go ahead and rewind to the previous incarnation of this regular expression, which was just a single dot star. This regular expression, dot star at dot star, means what again? It means 0 or more characters, followed by a literal @ sign, followed by 0 or more other characters. Now, when you pass this pattern in as an argument to re.search, it's going to read it from left to right and then use it to try to match against the input, email in this case, that the user typed in. Now, how is the computer, how is re.search going to keep track of whether or not the user's email matches this pattern? Well, it turns out that it's going to be using a machine of sorts, implemented in software known as a finite state machine, or more formally, a non-deterministic finite automaton. And the way it works, if we depict this graphically, is as follows. The re.search function starts over here in a so-called start state. That's the sort of condition in which it begins. And then it's going to read the user's email address from left to right, and it's going to decide whether or not to stay in this first state or transition to the next state. So for instance, in this first state, as the user's reading my email address, malin@harvard.edu, it's going to follow this curved edge up and around to itself, a reflexive edge. And it's labeled dot because dot, again, just means any character. So as the function is reading my email address, malin@harvard.edu, from left to right, it's going to follow these transitions as follows. M, A, L, A, N. And then it's hopefully going to follow this transition to this second state, because there's a literal @ sign both in this machine as well as in my email address. Then it's going to try to read the rest of my address. HARVARD.edu, and that's it. And then the computer's going to check, did it end up in an accept state, a final state that's actually depicted here pictorially a little differently with double circles, one inside of the other. And that just means that if the computer finds itself in that second accept state, after having read all of the user's input, it is indeed a valid email address. If by some chance the machine somehow ended up stuck in that first state, which does not have double circles and it is therefore not an accept state, the computer would conclude this is an invalid email address instead. By contrast, if we go back to my other version of the code where I instead had dot plus on both the left and the right, recall that re.search is going to use one of these state machines in order to decide from left to right whether or not to accept the user's input, like malin@harvard.edu. Can we get from the start state, so to speak, to an accept state to decide, yep, this was in fact meeting the pattern? Well, let's propose that this non-deterministic finite automaton looks like this instead. We're going to start as before in the leftmost start state, and we're going to necessarily consume one character per this first edge, which is labeled with the dot to indicate that we can consume any one character, like the M in malin@harvard.edu. Then we can spend some time consuming more characters before the @ sign, so the A, L-A-N. Then we can consume the @ sign. Then we can consume at least one more character, because recall that the regex has dot plus this time. And then we can consume even more characters if we want. So if we first consume the H in harvard.edu, that then leaves the A-R-V-A-R-D, and then .edu. And now here too, we're at the end of the story, but we're in an except state, because that circle at the end has 2 circles total, which means that if the computer, if this function finds itself in that except state after reading the entirety of the user's input, it is in fact, a valid email address. If by contrast, we had gotten stuck in one of those other states, unable to follow a transition, one of those edges, and therefore unable to make progress in the user's input from left to right, then we would have to conclude that that email address is in fact invalid. Well, how can we go upon improving this code further? Let me propose now that we check not only for a username, and also something after the username, like a domain name, but minimally required that the string ends with .edu as well. Well, I think I could do this fairly straightforward. Not only do I want there to be something after the @ sign, like the domain, like Harvard, I want the whole thing to end with .edu. But there's a little bit of danger here. What have I done wrong by implementing my regular expression now in this way by using .plus @.plus.edu? What could go wrong with this version?
The dot means something else in this context, where it means 0 or more repetitions of a character, which is why it will interpret it differently.
Exactly. Even though I mean for it to mean literally .edu, a period and then .edu, unfortunately in the world of regular expressions, dot means any character, which means that this string could technically end in AEDU or BEDU or CEDU and so forth, but that's not in fact that I want. So any instincts now as to how I could fix this problem, and let me demonstrate the problem more clearly. Let me go ahead and run this code here. Let me go ahead and type in mailin@harvard.edu, and as always, this does in fact work, but watch what happens here. Let me go ahead and do mailin@harvard, and then mailin@harvard?edu, enter. That too is valid. So I could put any character there and it's still going to be accepted, but I don't want ?edu. I want .edu literally. Any instincts then for how we can solve this problem here? How can I get this new function re.search and a regular expression more generally to literally mean a dot, might you think?
You can use the escape character, the \.
Indeed, the so-called escape character, which we've seen before outside of the context of regular expressions when we talked about new lines. \n was a way of telling the computer, I want a new line, but without actually literally hitting enter and moving the cursor yourself. And you don't want a literal n on the screen. So \n was a way to escape n and convey that you want a new line. It turns out regular expressions use a similar technique to solve this problem here. In fact, let me go into my regular expression, and before that final dot, let me put a single \. In the world of regular expressions, this is a so-called special sequence, and it indicates, per this \, and a single dot, that I literally want to match on a dot. It's not that I want to match on any character and then edu. I want to match on a dot or a period edu. But we don't want Python to misinterpret this \, as beginning an escape sequence, something special like \n, which even though we as the programmer might type 2 characters \n, it really is interpreted by Python as a single new line. We don't want any kind of misinterpretation like that here. So it turns out there's one other thing we should do for regular expressions like this that have a backslash used in this way. I want to specify to Python that I want this string, this regular expression in double quotes, to be treated as a raw string, literally putting an R at the beginning of the string to indicate to Python that you should not try to interpret any backslashes in the usual way. I want to literally pass the backslash and the dot and the edu into this particular function search in this case. So it's similar in spirit to using that F at the beginning of a format string, which of course tells Python to format the string in a certain way, plugging in variables that might be between curly braces. But in this case, R indicates a raw string that I want passed in exactly as is. Now, it's only strictly necessary if you are in fact using backslashes to indicate that you want some special sequence like backslash dot. But in general, it's probably a good habit to get into to just use raw strings for all of your regular expressions so that if you eventually go back in, make a change, make an addition, you don't accidentally introduce a backslash and then forget that that might have some special or misinterpreted meaning. Well, let me go ahead and try this new regular expression. I'll clear my terminal window, run Python of validate, run Python of validate.py, and then I'll type in my email address correctly, maylin@harvard.edu, and that's fortunately still valid. Let me clear my screen and run it one more time, Python of validate.py, and this time let's mistype it as maylin@harvard?edu, whereby there's obviously not a dot there, but there is some other single character that last time was misinterpreted as valid. But this time, now that I've improved my regular expression, it's discovered as indeed invalid. Any questions now on this technique for matching something to the left of the @ sign, something to the right, and now ending with .edu explicitly?
What happens when a user enters multiple @signs?
A good question. You kind of called me out here. Well, when in doubt, let's try. Let me go ahead and do Python of validate.py, maylin @ harvard.edu, which also is incorrect. Unfortunately, my code thinks it's valid. So another problem to solve, but a shortcoming for now. Other questions on these regular expressions thus far?
Can you use curly brackets M instead of backslash?
Can you use curly brackets instead of backslash? Not in this case. If you want a literal dot, backslash dot is the way to do it literally. How about one other question on regular expressions?
Is this the same thing that Google Forms uses in order to categorize data? In, let's say, if you've got multiple people sending in requests about some feedback, do they categorize the data that they get using this particular regular expression thing?
Indeed, if you've ever used Google Forms to not just submit it, but to create a Google form, one of the menu options is for response validation, in English at least. And what that allows you to do is specify that the user has to input an email address or a URL or a string of some length. But there's an even more powerful feature that some of you may not have ever noticed. And indeed, if you'd like to open up Google Forms, create a new form temporarily, and poke around, you will actually see, in English at least, quote-unquote regular expression mentioned as one of the mechanisms you can use to validate your user's input into your Google Forms. So in fact, after today, you can start avoiding these specific drop-downs of like email address or URL or the like, and you can express your own patterns precisely as well. Regular expressions can even be used in VS Code itself. If you go and find or do a find and replace in VS Code, you can of course just type in words like you could into Microsoft Word or Google Docs. You can also type, if you check the right box, regular expressions and start searching for patterns, not literally specific values. Well, let me propose that we now enhance this implementation further by introducing a few other symbols, because right now with my code, I keep saying that I want my email address to end with .edu and start with a username, but I'm being a little too generous. This does in fact work as expected for my own email address, malin@harvard.edu. But what if I type in a sentence like, my email address is malin@harvard.edu, and suppose I've typed that into the program, or I've typed that into a Google form, is this going to be considered valid or invalid? Well, let's consider. It's got the @ sign, so we're good there. It's got one or more characters to the left of the @ sign. It's got
Well, I'm so tired. Actually, I'm so tired of love song. I'm not tired, so I'm gonna do the homework. The homework that I have to do is let me go for a glass of water. Just please wait. Wait.